So it's very common in philosophy for philosophers to object to positions on the grounds that those positions are meaningless or unintelligible. You find these sorts of arguments cropping up everywhere. Logical positivism, ordinary language philosophy, pragmatism, Wittgensteinian critiques of metaphysics, classical objections to deviant logics. I mean, if you engage with philosophy at all, right, you're bound to come across arguments to the effect that certain positions are off the table because those positions are meaningless or unintelligible. And of course, different philosophers have quite different conceptions of what it takes for something to be meaningful. But in one way or another, this is a pretty common objection that comes up. And it's an objection which I've dabbled in myself. So I've done a video in which I express some puzzlement over the notion of categorical reasons. So the notion of reasons for action as used by moral realists. I'll link that video in the comments. You can check out Lance Bush, who I've done a couple of videos with. This is something that this is a type of argument that he often brings up, is the idea that the moral realists, or at least many types of moral realism, are simply unintelligible. Now, so as I said, it's a common type of argument. It's an argument that I also find attractive, but I have worries about this, and so I want to talk about this today. Some worries about this. So let's say that I think that some position P is unintelligible or meaningless. Is that an argument against P? Right? Well, okay. So first of all, so first of all, the most that I am inclined to say here is, if you want me to accept a position, then I'm going to need to understand what that position is. And then, of course, that sort of puts the dialectical burden on you to explain the position in a way that makes sense to me. If somebody hasn't explained a position in a way that makes sense to me, then most of the time I'm probably not going to accept it. This is kind of how I frame the point about categorical reasons in meta-ethics, right? So if a moral realist appeals to this idea of categorical reasons, I'm going to say, well, look, that doesn't really make any sense to me. If you want me to get on board with your view, you're going to have to explain it to me in a way that does make sense. So I think that even this, though, might be a little too, so to say, well, in order for me to accept a position, the position has to be intelligible to me. I think even that might be a little too strong. First of all, because it seems like there could be compelling arguments in favour of positions that I find unintelligible. One case where we find something like this is with people who take, realist views of things like quantum mechanics. Feynman famously said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. But, of course, we can add, well, there's very strong evidence that quantum mechanics is correct. If we can't understand it, that's more a problem for us than a problem for the theory, right? The theory is fine. The theory has extremely compelling evidence in its favour. But human beings are just sort of cognitively limited in certain ways, which makes it impossible for them to, properly grasp or to visualize or to, do whatever else it is, whatever other cognitive process is involved in assigning genuine meaning to something, right? Like, I guess this is the point, is that, we can have a theory where the theory will have very compelling evidence and arguments in its favor, but where the theory is such that there's something about the sort of, there's some limit to human cognitive processing, which means that, we're not able to perform those processes, whatever they are, that are involved in assigning genuine meaning to something. So if we think that what it is to assign meaning to something is to be able to sort of visualize it in a certain way or picture it in a certain way, see how its parts fit together, then of course, we may well end up concluding that, oh, well, actually quantum mechanics is just, it's meaningless, at least to us. It's unintelligible. We do not have the cognitive capacities to get it. So But that's not an objection, right? That's not an objection to quantum mechanics. Similarly, so if we have an argument with, let's say somebody presents an argument, and the argument contains premises that I find attractive, that I'm inclined to accept, and it has inferential steps that seem to be valid, but this argument leads to, moral non-naturalism, right? Well, it looks like what I have there is a compelling argument for moral non-naturalism, and I mean, now I have to deal with the argument. It's not really much use appealing to this idea that, well, moral non-naturalism is unintelligible to me. I mean, maybe that's just a problem with me rather than a problem with moral non-naturalism. I mean, why should it be? Why should it be the case that that the truth is intelligible? Why should reality be that way, right? Why should we assume that the world is such that we're going to be able to like understand and assign meaning or visualize or whatever the way that things really are? So it may be that we have kind of evidence pointing in the direction of the truth, right? But then the truth itself is something that we can't get because of our cognitive limitations. It seems like reality could be that way. I mean, at least I don't see why we would rule that out right from the start. So, the fact. So here's the thing, right? If I can show that some position is unintelligible, then, I mean, it seems like defenders of that position could just come along and say, well, that's a problem. That's a problem with us, or even just you, right? Maybe it's just you that finds it unintelligible. But even if it's the case that this is unintelligible to everybody, right? Well, maybe that's just a problem. Maybe that's just our problem. I mean, I've been in this kind of position before, actually, because I used to hold the view. I don't hold it anymore, but I used to hold the view that that there were various skeptical arguments that were compelling, arguments for radical skepticism that were compelling, but that some beliefs were just psychologically irresistible. So I just was in a position where, like, I found certain skeptical arguments. I couldn't beat them. In fact, not only couldn't I beat them, but I thought, yeah, those arguments are basically convincing. But at the same time, I found myself with beliefs that I just thought that I couldn't give up. I'm no longer so pessimistic about giving up beliefs. But, back then, right, yeah, I mean, I found these arguments compelling, but these arguments led to certain conclusions. So, for instance, the belief that, I have a body, that I'm surrounded by various objects like a computer and a cup. I couldn't give that up, or at least I thought I couldn't give that up. But I still found the skeptical arguments compelling. And so there's a tension there. I mean, there's a tension there, but I see no reason why the appropriate response in that situation is to just go with the beliefs and then reject the arguments. So I see no reason why the appropriate response in that situation is to say, well, because I can't give up these beliefs, right, I just sort of have to endorse on reflection these beliefs, rather than the skeptical arguments that challenge those beliefs. So in the same way, if there's a compelling argument to a conclusion that I find unintelligible, why on reflection should I, like go with the idea, well, this is unintelligible, so it must be false, rather than going with what seems like the compelling arguments. So yeah, I mean, look, so this is one point, right, is it seems entirely possible to me that there could be positions that are unintelligible, but where we have compelling arguments for them. I think that as much as I find it puzzling I can't wrap my head around what categorical reasons, for instance, are supposed to be. If you can give me a compelling argument for categorical reasons, then, okay, I'll have to take that seriously. I mean, it's like, okay, maybe I'll just have to say, okay, there are these things, but I just don't really know how it works. I can't wrap my head around it. So this brings me, though, to a second point, which I maybe is more important, which is, so, as I said, many philosophers will appeal to these sort of unintelligibility arguments, or arguments which try to show that certain positions are meaningless. And in the course of giving such an argument, you're going to have to assume some conception of what exactly meaning is. So what is meaning? What is it for something to be meaningful? I mean, there are multiple notions of meaningfulness available in philosophy. There are multiple notions of intelligibility. So I'm going to present a deflationary notion, right? So here's a very simple notion of meaningfulness, which would make pretty much anything meaningful. So I could say, look, all that's required in order for some position P to be meaningful is, number one, I understand the terms used in stating P. Number two, P is phrased in a way that's grammatically correct. And then number three, I can tell a story about P. I can make further inferences from P. So, for instance, on this conception of meaning, square circle is going to come out as totally meaningful, totally intelligible, because I know what a square is, I know what a circle is. If I say something like, the window is shaped like a square circle, well, that's grammatically correct, and it's something that I can tell a story about or make further inferences from. So I can say, for instance, well, if the window is shaped like a square circle, then a perfectly spherical piece of cardboard would both, of the appropriate size, would both completely cover and not completely cover the window, right? So I've made an inference from from my claim that the window is shaped like a square circle. So okay, we have a claim that I think a lot of people would want to say is totally baffling, but I've given you a notion of meaning, this sort of very deflationary notion of meaning, on which it's meaningful, right? All that's required is that, well, you understand the terms used in stating something, and then it's grammatical, and you can make further inferences from it. Now, if you go for this notion of meaning, then pretty much every philosophical position is going to come out as being meaningful. So in particular, categorical reasons, as discussed in meta-ethics, that's going to come out as meaningful. Moral realism, moral non-naturalism, all of those positions are going to be meaningful. I know what moral values are. I know what objectivity is. I know what prescriptivity is. I know how to use these terms. I know how to use the term mind independent. I know how to use the term reason. I know how realists argue for their position. I know what follows from it. I know how to argue against it. I know all of the moves in the game, as it were. And so that's enough, right? As long as I can do all of that on this conception of meaningfulness, of intelligibility, then it just is meaningful. It just is intelligible for me. That's it. Now of course, I might well object and say, well, look, I know how to sort of talk the realist language, but I don't really get it. But the problem here is that knowing how to talk the realist language basically just is what it is to get it on this conception of meaning. So that's a way of thinking about meaning, right? And that seems, I imagine, that's okay. Maybe you don't want to say that is the correct theory of meaning or something, and obviously people have come up with more substantive conceptions of meaning. So let's say that you plump for some different theory of meaning, which is much more stringent, which is much more substantive. So you might well say, look, in order for something to be meaningful, it has to be the case, not just that you know how to use the language, but that maybe it has to be the case that this is part of a theory that allows you to make predictions or to control nature. Or maybe you say, in order for it to be meaningful, you have to be able to visualize it in a particular way. So there's a much more sort of sophisticated cognitive process going on, that counts as meaningfulness. Okay, so we have my deflationary meaning, and now we have this more substantive conception of meaning. And let's then just grant that on this more substantive conception of meaning, categorical reasons are meaningless. Why should I care about that conception of meaning? Why is that the one that should matter to me? I mean, clearly, I've explained a notion of meaning, right? So I have a notion of meaning, and you have a notion of meaning. Um, when I outline this deflationary notion, I take it that you probably understand me. And when you outline your more substantive notion, I understand you. So, but why should I care about this one? I mean, okay, so take for instance, like logical positivism. People seem to have moved beyond logical positivism these days for many reasons. Now, the logical positivists, they had this criterion of meaningfulness based on the verification principle, right? So, a sentence is meaningful just in case it's either analytic or empirically verifiable. And there are countless technical objections to this, right? So maybe it's, self-refuting, whatever. But just suppose that those technical objections could be overcome, okay? Well, that would still leave us with the question, so what, right? Like, so what? Like, yes, I mean, I understand this idea that, you have a way of classifying sentences, right? So, with the logical positive saying, look, sentence is meaningful just in case it's either analytic or empirically verifiable. And of course, we can classify sentences. We can find the ones that are analytic or empirically verifiable, and then there's all of the other ones that are neither analytic nor empirically verifiable. And the logical positivists say, well, only these ones are meaningful. So, the ones that are neither analytic nor empirically verifiable, right, they're just off the table, meaningless, unintelligible. But why accept that part, right? I mean, even if the logical positivists could frame their verification principle in a way that overcame all of these technical objections to it, why should that be the conception of meaning that matters to me? I mean, in fact, let's put it this way, right? We could say to the logical positivists, fine, right? That's meaning, right? You're right about what meaning is, okay? So in order for a statement to be meaningful, it must be either analytic or empirically verifiable. Fine. Well, very well then. I don't care about meaning. I care about schmeaning. And all that's required for a statement to be schmeaningful, right, is that, like, I understand each of the terms used in stating it, and then I can kind of make further inferences from it and tell a story about it, right? So all that's required for schmeaning is this much sort of looser, more deflationary idea. So maybe, moral non-naturalism, yeah, it's not meaningful. Fine, it isn't meaningful, but it is schmeaningful. Yeah, moral non-naturalism isn't intelligible, but it is schmintelligible, right? And that's what we care about, right? We care about schmeaning and schmintelligibility. I'm struggling to see what the issue is with this. So I suppose this is the other problem, right? The big thing that worries me about these arguments that appeal to meaninglessness or unintelligibility, I think the big worry I have about these is that it looks like any of those arguments is going to be presupposing some conception of what it is for something to be meaningful. But then I can just say, well, I don't care about that. Like, I don't care about, the strict conception of meaning that you have. Here's this other notion that I do care about instead, right? So, here's this other, here are the features that you think a position has to display in order to be kind of put on the table and taken seriously. I just have a less stringent view of what those features are, and I'm not really sure what's problematic about that. So yeah, that's it. That's all I wanted to talk about. I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks for watching.